The year that Picasso spent in Royan, that is from September 1939 until August 1940, represents the only time in his career up to that time where he spent a year away from his principal studio. And when he arrived in Royan, he discovered a place that was small, that had a very limited kind of availability of artists' materials, partly due to the time that he was there. And also that the studio that he first set up, it was also very small. And his life was kind of concentrated. His personal life, his artistic life, his intellectual life. He brought with him his secretary, Jaime Sabartés. And that 1 year allowed him to focus on making art in a very specific way. Now, the fact there were limitations to materials meant that working out his ideas in sketchbooks was an obvious way to let his imagination and creativity develop in a way that could then be adapted in different forms. And I think the exhibition provides a good balance between seeing the sketchbook, seeing each page, how a particular image changes, and then looking around the exhibition space and seeing paintings or other media, works in other media that reflect those drawings. So I think it's an unusual opportunity.
I think also seeing the actual sketchbooks makes one aware how small they were as a basis for making art, and that they had large numbers of pages, but the format was really extremely small. And when you look at them in reproductions, in books, you have no idea of the actual physical shape and size of the sketchbooks he was working on. And an exhibition like this gives an opportunity of seeing them as they actually are.
And in some ways, I think this goes for Picasso during his whole life, and he did use sketchbooks at different periods during his whole life. You get very close to the artist. It's almost as if you're seeing that idea translated with his hand on that page. It's very different from seeing a painting or even a kind of worked out drawing. There's something very immediate, and you're getting very close to his creativity. The focus of many of the drawings in the sketchbooks is on a seated woman, usually a nude woman, usually inspired by the presence of his lover, Dora Maar, who's also represented in the exhibition. And if one follows Picasso's mind and how he was looking at how he could develop an image of a woman which was new or radical, that's what Sabartés was talking about. And if you look at the painting that's in the Malaga Museum, the Picasso Museum here, it's a really radical formulation of a body, a kind of head turned upwards, eyes at either end, and the kind of culminating work in the exhibition, the painting of the woman dressing her hair from the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, that's an original kind of formulation of the human body. And I think, for me, that's what Sabartés was talking about.
The circumstances in which that happened are very interesting. The deputy director of the Maison Française in Athens, Roger Milliet, wanted to have a homage paid to the Greek resistance during the Second World War. And he went to Paris with his Greek wife, and they went around the studios and visited artists and their friends to ask for contributions, and literary contributions as well as paintings, for this campaign. And it seems that Picasso was very favorable to the idea. It conformed to his own feelings at that time. And it was through his friend Paul Éluard that he was persuaded to give a work. And looking at the works that were done during the period and that would have been available, it seems as if the painting he chose was one that had a special significance, that was among a number of similar works, one that really reached the top of his achievements.
And on the back of the painting, he kind of boldly wrote, "This I'm giving, because of the Greek resistance." He knew what he was doing. And I think the fact it appears in the Dora Maar photos of his second studio in Royan, that is in the summer of 1940, before he left. It appears on an easel. It also appears in drawings, as you mentioned, in the sketchbooks, as well as the studies for the painting in an earlier sketchbook. I think in some ways that painting is the most political of Picasso's work, because I think this is an interesting time, and a lot of art historians have tried to situate Picasso's work in the context of war. But Picasso had left. He'd left Paris. He was at a seaside resort. He wasn't in a place that was being bombed. Yes, there was a current of war, and there were people coming through Royan who talked about war, and he was worried about his Paris studio and what might happen to his work. But he wasn't painting the war. But I think the Athens picture, he felt, had another significance, and that's why he chose that one as a donation.
I think it was certainly a connection, and his interest in bullfighting started when he was a child in Malaga and continued. I think the significance of Royan was, there were two things. One was that it was a center of, one of the few centers of bullfighting in France. And they had what were called the courses landaises, which were bullfights in which the bull was not killed, but which was the local kind of bullfighting. And there was a village near Royan where they had these courses, and also one of the suburbs of Bordeaux, which was just across the Gironde estuary. The other thing is that one of the artists who lived and who died in Bordeaux was Goya. And his connection with Goya, bullfighting, was something that brought them very close together, and his indebtedness to Goya was something that meant a great deal to him.
I think you can never underestimate Picasso's memory, both visually. He remembered paintings he saw as a young boy throughout his life. He remembered things about the way they were painted, but he remembered artists like Goya. And I think the fact of being in Royan meant that he felt Goya was close to him. And I think the subject of the bullfight has to be a reflection of that. On the other hand, it's Picasso's subject. He had just painted Guernica in terms of the imagery of the bullfight, the Minotauromachia. He painted his mistress, Marie-Thérèse, as a rejoneadora on the back of a bull. It was part of him. And yes, I think it was very much something that started in Malaga and stayed with him. And I think the fact that he didn't go to bullfights when he was in Royan, even though there were the opportunities to see the courses landaises just before he left, I think that's really key. It means, again, that memory it was so strong. It was so strong in detail. He could draw a bull, and you see that in the sketchbooks, or the horses, in a way that you felt he was there, but he wasn't.
But his last visit to Spain in 1934,
That's good.
he went to bullfights in San Sebastián, in Madrid, in Barcelona, and he introduced his son Paul to bullfights. And it was a very important part of that visit to Spain was to see the bulls.